This is a quick demonstration on Internet of Things and integrating to Azure. Why would an ERP guy like me be showing this, especially the simple demonstration that I'm going to be showing, which connects an Arduino with a temperature sensor to an MQTT gateway that then stores data in an Azure database? Well, there's a lot of ERP solutions that could use something like this, like property management or different types of projects or any kind of thing that you need to monetize on by sensing or changing things. We can use this to send information out to, say, small displays to let your employees know what's going on as far as sales or help desk tickets, or be able to know, do we have water in a basement and I need to be able to do a help ticket to have somebody fix that. So there's lots of opportunities here to apply to ERP. There are several components to this. There's the Raspberry Pi that is running the MQTT broker. Then I have an Arduino that has a temperature sensor on it and an Ethernet board so that it can connect to the network and in turn connect to the MQTT broker. So the first thing I did is I went into Azure, into the portal, and I created a mobile service. If I go in here, I can see that I've got something called Catalina IoT. I click into here, and I created several different data resources. We can call them tables. So I created an application, and I'm just using this so that I can have different endpoints based on the type of application I'm going to be running. Device, I don't have that implemented yet, but I'm going to have this so that your devices can self-identify. So when they log into the system for the first time, they'll let themselves be known, saying, I'm this device, and these are all of the sensors that I'm going to be giving data for. And then device data. This is data that we're going to be receiving from devices and then store into a resource or into a table in Azure. So you can see I've got a few of them here, and I've got some devices. I only have device ID equals 100. I've just got one device on here. And then I've got a sensor. So each device can have 0 or more sensors that are going to be sending data out to the system to be able to capture and be able to do things on. And then a value. So I'm just capturing temperature, and I'm looking at the value over time. So if I look at how this works, I'll just pull up Postman, and I'll see that I can just make a call to my API. I have headers, and I've got the application and its key, and I can go ahead and send that, and I'll get data back. So this is just a simple get. And so when you create a resource in an Azure mobile service, it will automatically create those CRUD API calls for create, read, update, and delete. In this case, I'm just using the get to get data. So I can also do additional filtering, and in this case, I'm going to filter against device ID equals 100. And if I hit send, it's going to filter things out by that device ID. And I could go and search against any number of the fields just like you would in SQL Server. But I want to do something a little bit differently because I want to know what the most recent temperature is so that I can plug this into a dashboard and know what's going on at the current moment and then be able to map that over time. So if I go back into Azure and I look at API, I can create a custom API. In this case, I'm creating last temp. And if I look at here, I can see that I've got a script for post and get, and we could do that for any of the CRUD functionality. In this case, I'm just worried about the get, and I'm querying against my device data table where device ID equals DID, which is something I'm passing in the query string, and I'm ordering it by created at descending. So this should bring me back the most recent temperature that was stored for this device in the database. So if I look back at Postman and I do a call against that, and right now I'm just going to find out the last temp on DID 100. I hit send, and it's going to bring me back just the most recent temperature, and it's 81 degrees, 81.39 degrees. So that makes it easy for now that I can go ahead and tie that back into a dashboard and use it. So next, let's talk a little bit about how I've set up the sensor and how I'm actually reporting back into MQTT. There are several different components to the system. First is the MQTT broker, and I'm using Mosquito on the Raspberry Pi, and I have that installed here so we can see that it is actually running on the Raspberry Pi. So what Mosquito does is it sits there as a server for MQTT, and it listens for devices out there to send messages to it. And then when it sees those messages, it then retransmit those so that other devices can then listen to that as well. Is an MQTT client that I wrote in C#, and that uses the M2 MQTT library. And what this does is it sits there and listens to the MQTT broker, and it reads for a particular application, and it brings everything back. And depending on what the topic is, it splits out the topic, makes sure that the topic is correct so that it knows how to route that. And in this case, I'm looking at the second element in the topic, which is either going to be a D or an S. A D is going to represent data that's coming from a device. An S is going to be representing data that's coming back to a device so that the device needs to act on it. So if it's a D, then that's the only thing I really care about in this agent, because I'm then saving that data back to Azure. So if I see the D, I then get the information for that, and then I'm sending that through a JSON RESTful API helper, and then I'm just publishing that out to Azure so that Azure can then take that data as a post and then store it in one of the resources. And in this case, it's the device data resource. The final piece is the Arduino code. And I've written some code here, and we're using a Dallas temperature, one-wire temperature, as well as a simple pub/sub client, which is a library that I'm using to handle the MQTT transformations. Data coming back and forth. I'm just hard-coding this device to be device 100, and I'm looking on pin 2 so that I can see which pin I'm receiving the data in. I go through, I set up my IP address and all that great stuff, and here's my callback. I'll talk about that in a little bit later. I get my Ethernet client and my pub/sub client. The pub/sub client is the publish and subscription for MQTT. And when I set everything up, I'm going to listen to my MQTT server, or that's the server that I'm actually going to be publishing to and listening from with this port. And that callback that I had mentioned up at the beginning is if a message is coming back to me, then I'm going to call that callback method so that I can then handle what's coming back to me. So I'll look at the variable that's coming back to me and then be able to act on that. I set up my temperature, and when I loop through, I process the sensors. So I go and read from the sensors, and in this case I'm only reading from the first sensor that I find, and I will then publish that out. And I've got it hard-coded here so that I'm sending to this application. I'm saying that I'm a device, and I'm sending the data for the server to read and save to Azure. This is my device ID. This is the variable that I want to call it, and I'm going to pass it the actual temperature information. So if we look at this, let me just first go back into SQL Server, and you can see I've got a lot of data that's there that because everything's running. I'll just delete from that, and let me just start monitoring this. So I can see that I've found a device, which is my temperature device. I've attempted to connect to MQTT broker, and it's connected, and it just went and passed a temperature. Back in the code, I'm only sending temperature back if the temperature's changed. So I'm not going to go and send back the same data over and over and over again. So if its temperature is not equal to last temperature, and if you can see at the end of that loop, or at the end of that if, I then I set the last temp to the current temperature. So if I'm getting the same temperature over and over again, there's no reason for me to send the data out to the MQTT broker. So I can see that I've sent a few times, and if I go back through, I can query it, and I can see that I've now got temperature. Now I also have a way to send data back. So if I look at this, I'm going to bring up an MQTT client. Let's see if I can find that. And I'll just connect to my MQTT server. I'll move this out of the way so I can now see it. And I'm going to send something, and I'm using an S-type. And so the way I've got the topic is I'm doing something similar to mysensors.org, only a little bit different. And I'm distinguishing where I've got an application. That application decides which resource we're going to be writing to, either a D or an S. A D stands for a device sending data out that needs to be captured. An S is a communication back to a device, so that device 100 will then read into var1 this information. So if I publish that out, then what that does is that sends that data out to the MQTT broker, and you can see here my Arduino just received that. So now it sees in var1 this text. So now it can deal with something like, say, display something on an LCD display or LED display or something like that. So say you're using this in an ERP solution, you could have your ERP, like Dynamics SL, could be doing sales totals or whatever, and then you could send that data out to a device that has a simple, cheap LED readout, and then you could go and display that. So whether it's the last number of emails you have, or the number of sales calls that are in queue, or whatever, you could go and then use these devices in your ERP. Okay, let's try to make this work. So I'm going to go ahead and just plug it in and turn on the Arduino. And I can see it's going on, and it's going to connect to the network. And I press on the temperature sensor just to go and get my body temperature to heat it up, and you can see that the sensor increases the dashboard, so I can see that it's in work. So when I take my finger off, it will immediately start to cool down, and I can see it start to move down quite quickly. So this shows how I can integrate directly with Azure and be able to read that data. I know this is a simple demonstration, but there's many different types of applications that you could do into ERP, manufacturing, inventory, property management, all those types of things. So keep that in mind when thinking about IoT and Azure and integration, and thank you very much. If you'd like more information, you can go www.catalinatechnology.com, or you can reach me at brian@catalinatechnology.com. Thank you.